What is up, guys? Coach Josiah here, AnastasiFitness.com. Today's video is all about what fats are good for you, bad for you, everything in between. And by the end of the video, you'll know exactly how much fat you should eat per day, along with the different types of fat your body needs to stay healthy and optimize performance. Let's go. All right, before we dive into each specific fat source, we first have to figure out what exactly makes a fat source healthy or unhealthy. When you think about what makes fat unhealthy, your first thought probably goes to saturated fat, cholesterol, and getting heart disease. So eating a lot of saturated fat can increase cholesterol levels, but there are so many factors that go into these health problems, so it's not as simple as just saying don't eat saturated fat. It's not that saturated fat is unhealthy itself. What causes health problems is eating in excess while not prioritizing other fat sources that are needed to keep yourself healthy. So the best way to determine if a fat source is good for you is going to depend on what your current diet looks like and what you need to improve on. And don't worry, we're gonna cover all this. By the end of the video, you'll know exactly which direction to take with your diet. A lot of it will depend on how your food choices affect your cholesterol levels, and I'm going to talk a lot about cholesterol. So before we dive more into saturated fat and the other fat sources, really quick, we're going to break down what cholesterol even is and how the type of fat you eat plays a role in keeping those levels strong. All right, so what exactly is cholesterol? The easiest way to think about cholesterol is a substance that travels through your bloodstream that helps produce hormones, vitamin D, and also with your digestion. You straight up would die if you didn't have cholesterol, so it's pretty damn important. There are two different types, LDL and HDL. You've probably heard of the terms good and bad cholesterol before, and that's exactly what LDL and HDL are. The way that helped me remember the difference is LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, so think of low density as low quality, so that is your bad cholesterol. And then HDL as high density is just the opposite. So what exactly makes cholesterol good or bad? Like I just mentioned, cholesterol is constantly circulating in your bloodstream, and LDL, bad cholesterol, is more prone to getting stuck in that bloodstream. In other words, it builds up in your arteries as plaque, and this is where a big cause of heart disease actually comes from. On the other hand, HDL, good cholesterol, does the opposite. It goes through the bloodstream and clears out the bad cholesterol, and it does its best to keep your arteries healthy. There are a lot of factors that go into your cholesterol levels, and the type of fat you choose to eat can play a big part in that. Now let's get into the first fat source. Okay, the first source we're going to dive into is saturated fat. You can think of saturated fat as the fat source that is solid at room temperature. So this would be your eggs, meat, and full fat dairy products. Most people associate saturated fat with high cholesterol, and that's because foods that have a lot of dietary cholesterol are generally saturated fat sources. I'm sure you've probably heard someone say eggs are bad for you just because they have a lot of cholesterol, and this is where people get really confused. Dietary cholesterol in food is not the cholesterol circulating in your blood. Your actual cholesterol levels are affected by a lot of different factors like working out and keeping your body at a healthy weight. And for most people, the amount of cholesterol you actually eat doesn't have that big of an impact on your levels as the research used to think. But this doesn't mean you can go ahead and eat all the saturated fat you want. Anything in excess can be bad for you, and saturated fat is no different. If you were to base your diet just around saturated fat, it would pull from other fat sources that have been shown to actually improve your cholesterol levels. You might be asking, what's even the point of eating saturated fat? And the answer to that is a lot of healthy and nutrient-dense foods are high in saturated fat. Eggs and red meat are both some of the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat, so completely eliminating wouldn't necessarily be the best move. As for how much you should actually eat every day, the Heart Association recommends no more than 5 or 6% of your daily calories should come from saturated fat. And the World Health Organization has that number at 10%. I know that's a little confusing because of the different recommendations. One thing I will say though is a lot of research is still being done on this topic, so no recommendations is 100% concrete yet. But saturated fat has been shown to be a lot safer than we used to think, so there's good news for that. I personally keep things between 5 and 10%, and that's what I'm going to recommend for you guys as well. Now let's get into the next fat source. All right, the next fat source we're going to dive into is polyunsaturated fat. You've probably heard the term omega-3s or 6s before. That term comes from this type of fat. Omega-3s come from your fatty fish like salmon, and your omega-6s come from plant-based oils like soybean and corn oil. Both of these are considered polyunsaturated fat. They just have different omega ratios. You may have also heard a bad name around omega-6s or seed oils in general, and there are a few reasons for this. The first is when you actually extract these oils from plants, it is done at extremely high heat, and this processing can create trans fat and free radicals, which are both not really ideal for our bodies. The other reason omega-6s have a bad reputation is just like we talked about saturated fat, anything in excess generally isn't the best for us. And unfortunately, the average American overconsumes omega-6s big time. This is because seed oils are cheap and massively increase the shelf life of food products, so companies will straight up inject this into the food since it's optimal in terms of saving money. And eating omega-6s in excess has been shown to increase inflammation in the body big time, which can result in a lot of damage to your arteries, along with increasing the risk for heart disease. Not to say all omega-6s are inherently bad themselves, they're just overconsumed. So I don't recommend you go out and look for this source of fat. You're going to get plenty based on how a lot of food is made nowadays. But what you can do to help the situation is to focus your attention more around omega-3s. So why should you focus on omega-3s? The biggest reason is omega-3s have been studied quite a bit, and what they've found is they reduce the risk of heart disease, improve your mood, and overall cognitive function, along with a lot of other benefits. And the reason for this is they give your body a starting point to make hormones that regulate blood clotting and relaxation of your arteries. Meaning if you don't eat enough of these omegas, your body's ability to make these hormones goes down, and that's where a lot of health complications can come from. So you know how I just said focus on omega-3s instead of 6s? The reason for that is the average American eats 20 times more omega-6s compared to omega-3s. And the actual recommendation to maintain good health is no more than a 4-to-1 ratio, so 1 gram of omega-3s for every 4 grams of omega-6s. As you can see, most people are nowhere even close to this ratio, and that's why I usually recommend taking a fish oil supplement. Unless you find yourself eating 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week, which I personally find really hard to do. Mostly because I'm not the biggest fan of eating fish. So if you aren't eating a decent amount of fish every week, make sure to supplement with fish oil. There's a link in the description for my recommended source if you do end up ordering some. Now let's get into the next fat source. All right, moving into monounsaturated fat. This is going to be your almonds, peanut butter, avocados, and your olive and avocado oils. Monounsaturated fat is completely uncontroversial since there is concrete evidence it is really good for your health. The biggest reason for this is it's the primary fat source that has been shown to help with good cholesterol while also lowering bad cholesterol. It also improves your health by just taking calories away from other fat sources like saturated fat and omega-6s. Not to say they are necessarily bad sources, but like I said earlier, nothing is going to be good for you in excess. This is just how the average American eats and why a lot of people nowadays have health problems. Most people's diets are more focused around saturated fat and omega-6s, which pulls away from monounsaturated fats, and doing this usually correlates with worse cholesterol levels. The easiest way I usually include these types of fats in my diet is by always cooking my meals in either avocado or olive oil, along with adding guacamole to my eggs in the morning or to my dinner, depending on what I'm eating. Okay, so now what should you do with all this info? Number 1, keep your saturated fat intake to no more than 10% of your daily calories. This is going to help keep your bad cholesterol levels down and allow you to focus on other fat sources that help with good cholesterol. Number 2 is don't look for omega-6 sources. You'll naturally get plenty of those through your diet. Instead, base your diet around nutrient-dense saturated fat sources, along with monounsaturated fat and omega-3s. These sources have huge upside, and by focusing on them, you should start to see pretty drastic improvements to your health. And number 3, shoot for about 20 to 30% of your daily calories coming from all fat sources. This is going to give you all the benefits and upsides of eating fat while still being able to eat an adequate amount of protein and carbs in your diet. Alright, that's it for the video today, guys. Hope you got some solid value from it. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for plenty more high value videos just like this one. Also, don't forget to check the link in the description for the fish oil product. As always, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Let's go.